Hello, namaste, tashidale, good day. My name is Jason McDonald, and I welcome you to today's teaching about the two truths and emptiness. So this teaching is about the two truths and emptiness, and I want to, what motivated me to teach this is that I'm in many different Facebook groups and I've noticed an incredibly high amount of confusion among students about the meaning of emptiness. Today I saw a student write that due to his or her, I don't know if their gender, due to their understanding of emptiness, they can no longer enjoy life. Well, that tells me that they're misunderstanding the meaning of emptiness. So I really want to provide some clarity, and I want to help people understand emptiness in a direct way so that you're not getting confused when you're receiving teachings from lamas. First of all, let's talk about the two truths. I'm going to quote Dalai Lama and a few other lamas as I explain this. Dalai Lama states in his book, Practicing Wisdom, he says, in Minyak Kunso's commentary, the author states that the two truths are presented from the point of view of two different perspectives. From the perspective of our everyday experience, the reality of the world is conventional and relative. From the perspective of the way things ultimately exist, the reality of the world is emptiness, which is the ultimate or absolute truth. The two truths are understood then as two different perspectives on one and the same world. So here, this is very, very important. The conventional truth is our normal everyday world. People, places, things, time, sleep, being awake, eating, walking, sitting, resting, working, thinking. All of the myriad, infinite number of things that we've experienced in our lives are considered conventional truth. There are a few other words for conventional truth. Relative truth. Conventional and relative truth are basically the same thing. The Buddha taught that he doesn't oppose the world. He doesn't argue with conventional truth. To say something doesn't exist at all would be nihilism. So, as Dalai Lama has pointed out here, there are two truths. And the conventional truth is the way things appear to us and the way that, really essentially everything we've already been taught since we were young, the way the world works, all of the different words and terms and phrases and the definitions of all of these different things in our world, that is the conventional truth. And the conventional truth and the ultimate truth coexist quite well. Now, another of Dalai Lama's books called Transcendent Wisdom, His Holiness states, the manifold events in the world are not non-existent. They do exist. They are able to help and hurt us. No other criterion for existence is necessary. Phenomena existing as dependently related events are those that change in dependence upon circumstances and those that appear in various ways due to circumstances. They change due to their dependence upon other events. If events existed independently, they could not change. Since they are dependent, they lack an independent nature. Thus, when something appears either good or bad, it seems to have that as an essential trait, but if we inspect matters more closely, we see that it is fundamentally subject to change. Thus, entities have two natures, one essential and the other superficial. So here, something really important. Dalai Lama says, the things in the world, he says the manifold events in the world are not non-existent. They do exist. They can help or hurt us, and no other criterion for existence is required. If you go and touch a hot stove, it'll burn your hand. So if somebody comes and says, well, that stove is empty, doesn't matter, your hand is still burned, okay? So things do exist. The fact that they can help or hurt us is the only proof we need that phenomena exist. However, the way they exist is what's called into question when we begin studying emptiness. So we're basically saying, as Dalai Lama points out, phenomena exist dependently. That's it. It's actually, if you really want to simplify emptiness, phenomena exist dependently, not independently. So the conventional truth is that phenomena exist dependently, in dependence upon causes and conditions, and they do not exist independently. Okay? So when Dalai Lama points out that things do exist because they can help or harm us, he's helping clarify something very, very important. Very important. And that is, when students begin studying emptiness, they think, they take emptiness to mean that nothing exists whatsoever. And that's totally wrong and totally false. That belief that nothing exists whatsoever is nihilism. And Buddhism is directly opposed to the idea of nihilism. So the Dalai Lama is saying things are not totally non-existent. It's just that they lack an inherent or independent existence, and therefore they're empty. Okay? And we'll get into this more. So what we should really begin to understand here is that dependent existence directly contradicts independent existence. As an example, let's take the metaphor of a tree. A tree exists in dependence upon a seed, soil, moisture, sunlight, and all of the conditions, also climate, the correct climate. Certain trees can only grow in certain climates. So that tree exists in dependence upon all of those conditions or causes, right? Now, we all know that the tree is dependent because it's common sense. But here's a question. Can the tree be both dependent and independent? Could a tree exist in dependence upon the seed, soil, moisture, and sunlight, while at the same time being independent of those things? No, there's no chance. The tree must be either dependent or independent. It cannot be either one. It's mutually exclusive. Dependence and independence are mutually exclusive. Okay? So this is a very important point, and it will help us to understand emptiness and the two truths. So one of the things His Holiness mentioned in that last quote was, he says, when something appears either good or bad, it seems to have that as an essential trait, so that goodness or badness. So he says, when something appears either good or bad, it seems to have that as an essential trait. But if we inspect matters more closely, we see that it is fundamentally subject to change. Thus, entities have two natures, one essential and the other superficial. So why is he saying something has that entities have an essential and a superficial nature? The essential nature is their ultimate truth. Their ultimate truth is their emptiness of independent existence. So that is the ultimate truth, and every object, every phenomena has an ultimate truth and a conventional truth. The ultimate truth of everything, including our body, our mind, the self, people, places, and things, everything you could ever imagine, everything is empty of independent existence. That is their ultimate truth. Their ultimate truth is that they lack an independent existence. Why? Because they arise dependently. Nothing is independent, right? So that's the ultimate truth. But Dalai Lama is saying things have he says two natures, an essential nature and a superficial nature. The essential nature that he's referring to is the ultimate truth. Now, the superficial nature, this is an interesting word. Conventional truth has many different synonyms. Conventional truth, relative truth, superficial truth. All of some lamas call it a false truth, because the way the Tibetan language is translated comes across as like a false truth or kind of a concealed truth. So Dalai Lama is telling us that all phenomena have an essential and a superficial nature. So conventional truth could be called a superficial nature because the mind of ignorance grasps all things as if they exist independently, but that's not how they exist. And so now we move into a different mode of discussion where we're talking about the discordance or the contradiction between appearances and existence. The way things appear and the way things exist directly contradict each other. Things appear one way, and things appear to us as if they're totally independent from their own side, autonomous, self-existent, and independent from their own side. That's how things appear or seem. But the way they exist is totally contradictory to their appearance. The way they exist is they're totally dependent. Okay? So that's why we're calling the conventional truth superficial, because it's the surface. You know, conventionally we call something a certain word, and so that's how things are conventionally on the surface. But if we analyze more deeply, the ultimate truth is that things are totally devoid or empty or lacking an independent existence or an independent nature. Okay? Okay, so according to Kensur Rinpoche, Jamba Tegchok, in his book Insight into Emptiness, he says the following quote: "The Tibetan term for conventional truth is Kunzab Dempa. Kun means all." By the way, pardon my Tibetan. I'm sorry, my Tibetan is almost non-existent. Kunzob Dempa. Kun means all and has the connotation of a variety and of many. Zob has the meaning of being false, of concealing. The reason that conventional truths are regarded as false is because their way of appearing and their way of existing are discordant. Denpa means truth, and in the case of conventional truths, it means true from the perspective of the true grasping mind, or true as far as the true grasping mind is concerned. In actual fact, nothing exists as it appears to the true grasping mind, so there is nothing that is truly existent. Even though from the perspective of the true grasping mind, they are true, they are not actually true because they do not exist as they appear. I realize that's a mouthful. Let's unpack some of this. What is the true grasping mind? It's the mind of ignorance that perceives things and then takes them to exist independently. That's what the true grasping mind is. So he's saying that Kunzob Dempa basically means that things are true from the perspective of the ignorant mind that grasps things to be inherently existent or independently existent. And that's why he's calling them, like essentially false truth. That doesn't mean things don't exist. This is very subtle. The teaching on emptiness is very subtle. Things do exist. So we are not negating or trying to disprove the conventional existence of things. But we have to help remove the ignorance in our minds that sees things and believes that they exist independently from their own side, because that's not how things exist. And I'll get into that a little bit more in a few minutes. I'll explain more deeply, what does that mean that things don't exist independently? How do they exist if they don't exist independently? And how are they dependent? What do they depend on? I'll get into that in just a few moments. Another quote from Kensur Rinpoche: "Each phenomenon has a conventional nature and an ultimate nature. So both ultimate truths and conventional truths, both ultimate truths and conventional truths have both an ultimate nature and a conventional nature. Their ultimate nature is their actual mode of existence, their emptiness. This is what I explained earlier. So the ultimate nature of phenomena is their emptiness. Their conventional nature is that they exist by being merely labeled and exist dependently. In addition, while nothing exists ultimately, all phenomena, including emptiness, exist conventionally. If something exists, it exists conventionally. That is the only type of existence there is. This is important. Pausing the quote for a minute. If something exists, it exists conventionally. That is the only type of existence there is. When you start studying emptiness, it's easy to get confused about all of these terms. This is important to remember. If something exists, it exists conventionally. That is the only type of existence there is. Back to the quote. Ultimate existence is the same as inherent existence, and that does not exist at all. Initially, it may sound strange to say emptiness exists conventionally, but when we think about the meaning of these terms, it becomes clear. Everything exists conventionally. Conventional existence is the only type of existence there is. Nothing exists ultimately. But remember, I'm saying existence. Everything exists conventionally. Nothing exists ultimately. But things do have an ultimate truth. The ultimate truth is they're empty or lacking of independent existence. Okay? Now we've basically kind of dove into the two truths. Now we're going to dive into emptiness. Again, quoting Khenshur Rinpoche Jamba Tekchok in his book Insight into Emptiness. He says, to understand emptiness, we do not need to understand all the reasons proving that phenomena are empty. As long as we understand dependent arising, even if this is the only line of reasoning we understand, if we keep deepening our comprehension of it, we will eventually understand emptiness. Dependent arising is called the king of reasonings because it not only refutes inherent existence, but it also establishes conventional nominal existence. This line of reasoning is a straightforward and simple approach. The person does not inherently exist because it is a dependent arising. Because the person arises and exists in dependence on other factors, it cannot be truly existent. To understand the import of this reasoning, we must understand the types and meaning of dependent arising. So here, this is very important. Lama Tsongkhapa, one of the great Tibetan masters, who followed a line of reasoning from Chandrakirti, Nagarjuna, and a line of Indian masters that kind of clarified the meaning of emptiness and essentially created this philosophical school called the Madhyamaka. So Lama Tsongkhapa follows the Madhyamaka, and then there are subdivisions of Madhyamaka, and he follows the Prasangika Madhyamaka philosophical school. And you don't need to worry too much about all of that, but the main thing is Lama Tsongkhapa, he strongly believed in dependent origination as the king of reasoning. The reason, why did he believe that? Why did he feel that way? Because when we understand dependent origination, as Khenshur Rinpoche just pointed out, when we understand dependent origination, it negates nihilism. Remember I said in the beginning, when people start studying emptiness, they get really confused sometimes, and they think that the fact that everything's empty means that everything totally lacks any existence whatsoever. People start to believe this because they haven't received proper instruction on emptiness. So Lama Tsongkhapa is telling us dependent origination is the king of reasonings because it negates nihilism. So the fact that something arises dependently, the very fact that it's arising means it exists. So therefore we cannot say it doesn't exist, because that would be nihilism, which is wrong. Nihilism is totally, contradictory to the teachings of Buddhism. So dependent origination disproves nihilism, and then it also disproves inherent existence or independent existence. So it's in the middle. So it's called the middle way path, Madhyamaka, middle way, because it disproves nihilism, which is the total lack of existence whatsoever, and it disproves independent or inherent existence. So it's perfectly situated between two extremes. So dependent origination, if you can learn emptiness using dependent origination, which is what I'm teaching, you can perfectly negate nihilism, which is this idea that things totally lack existence, and you can perfectly negate independent existence, which is the idea that things exist permanently and independently from their own side. Okay? So, now I'd like to move on to another quote from a really wonderful master named Geshe Sopa. Geshe Sopa was a master scholar. He's passed away many years ago, but he was a master scholar. He came to the West, I believe it was the 50s or 60s. He came to America, settled in Wisconsin, and became a university professor teaching Buddhism. And he was really one of the first Tibetan Lamas to propagate Buddhism in the West. And he was such a master scholar that he was on a board, like a committee or a board that reviewed Dalai Lama's debating, critiqued his debating. So, Dalai Lama is the master of all masters. So if this master was critiquing Dalai Lama, that really kind of authenticates his mastery of the Dharma of Buddhism. So he said in his book, Steps on the Path to Enlightenment, his name is Geshe Sopa. In his book, Steps on the Path to Enlightenment, book number 5, he says, emptiness is defined as follows. To say that a thing is empty of inherent existence means it does not exist independently of a perceiving mind. There are different ways of being dependent, ranging from gross to subtle. Dependent on causes, dependent on parts, and dependent on imputation by mind. Those are the 3 types he mentions. Back to the quote. When Tsongkhapa says that a realization of dependent arising will reverse ignorance, he is referring to the subtlest understanding of dependent arising. Nothing exists inherently from its own side, independently of a mind that perceives or conceives it. If we do not comprehend emptiness, we cannot see the truth of dependent arising or relativity. A direct realization of emptiness corresponding to the subtlest level of dependent arising clears away ignorance. It will help here to clarify the use of the word exist. To exist means to be known, proved, or established by valid knowledge. If something is known, it exists. If it is not known, it does not exist. So, not known and not existent indicate the same thing. Now here, Geshe Sopa gives us 3 types of dependence. The first type of dependence is dependence on causes. This is fairly simple. The tree exists in dependence upon causes: the seed, the soil, moisture, sunlight, and the proper climate. Okay? That's essentially what dependence on causes is. Nothing arises independent of causes. The tree cannot arise independent of a seed. You need the seed, you need the soil, you need the sunlight. The next type of dependency is dependence upon parts. The tree exists dependently upon its own parts. The trunk, the branches, the leaves, all of the roots, all of the different parts of the tree. These are the parts. That tree's very existence arises in dependence upon its parts. Have you ever seen a tree without a trunk, roots, branches, and leaves? No, most likely you haven't. The very existence of the tree is dependent upon all the parts of the tree, right? But it gets more interesting. Actually, the tree and its parts have what is referred to as mutually terminological dependence. They are mutually terminologically dependent upon each other. The tree exists in dependence upon its parts, and the parts exist in dependence upon the tree. For example, you've never found a tree without the parts of the tree, as I mentioned. You've also never found parts of a tree without a tree. If there's a leaf, you know that it exists in dependence upon the tree that it grew from, right? A leaf on the ground did not come from a car. It did not come from a bicycle. It didn't grow from a skyscraper. That leaf exists in dependence upon the tree. And the tree exists in dependence upon the leaves. So they're mutually dependent upon one another. There can never be a tree separate from its parts. And the parts of the tree cannot exist independent of the tree. So Geshe, I'm going to quote from Geshe Sopa's book. A whole is imputed on its parts, and those parts are imputed on the whole. So the whole is the tree. So I'm pausing the quotation. The whole is the tree. The tree is imputed on its parts. That means labeled on its parts. And those parts are imputed on the whole. So he says each member of the pair has a mutually dependent relationship with its counterpart. A basis and its characteristics, or an agent and the object acted on, cannot exist without each other. The same applies to any subject-object relationship. This notion of mutually dependent relationship is specific to Madhyamaka philosophy. So, there can be no tree without the parts of the tree. There can be no parts without the whole. How could something be a part of a non-whole, right? How can the leaf be a part of a non-tree? The tree is the whole. So they're mutually dependent, okay? Remember, what dependent origination proves is that things do exist on one hand, and that things do not exist independently on the other hand. So we're going through the ways the tree is dependent, okay? So just to review, the first type of dependence was dependence upon causes and conditions. That's the tree exists in dependence upon the leaves, branches, trunk, and roots. Causes, soil, sunlight, and the right climate. So that's the first type of dependence upon causes. Second type of dependence upon causes is more subtle. That is, the tree exists in dependence upon its parts. And by the way, the parts exist in dependence upon the tree. It's mutual. That's a mutual dependence. But those are the first two types of dependence. The third is the most subtle and most important for yogis or contemplatives or people that really want to study emptiness. The third type of dependence is dependence upon a mind that conceives and labels it. Now, what does this mean? When you see something with a trunk and branches and green leaves, the technical term for that is a basis for designation. It's really just a way of saying the thing we call a tree, but we call it a basis for designation. So there's this thing that you see. It has roots in the ground, it has a trunk, and then it has all these branches with leaves on them. We see that thing, and then our mind imputes the label tree onto that thing. We call that thing the basis of designation, and then we call the word tree imputation or label. We're labeling tree onto the basis of designation. Those are two different things, by the way. The basis for designation is one thing, and then the imputation tree is a second thing. The mind of ignorance perceives these things to be one. And that's the problem. I'm going to quote Dalai Lama. In his book, Transcendent Wisdom, he says, when pondering the nature of existence, we find that entities are not found upon seeking them analytically. So they exist by means of conventional, conceptual designation. They do undeniably exist, but as long as they do not exist independently from their own side, they must exist by the power of subjective convention. There's no alternative. An entity exists due to its being designated upon something that is not it. First, we need to understand that. Then we should see how things appear to the mind. Now, this is the most subtle type of emptiness. Its existence independence upon thought and terminology, or you could say the mind that conceives and labels it. There's different words used to explain this third type of dependence. So you could say phenomena exist in dependence upon the mind that conceives and labels it, or you could say independence upon thought and terminology, independence upon we could call this terminological dependence, independence upon terminology. So your mind perceives something or sees something or knows something and then uses a term and imputes a term on top of it, or it kind of covers that object with a conceptual term or a conventional term or a conventional designation. These are all kind of pointing to the same thing. They're different words, but they all mean the same thing, which is that phenomena are just the basis of designation. So that thing that you look at and you think is a tree is not really a tree. It's the basis to be designated a tree. So there's the term in the mind, and then there's that thing out there, and the mind imputes meaning onto them. So this kind of explanation helps us understand emptiness in a deeper way. Phenomena do exist, undeniably. They exist on a conventional level. So an object's conventional truth is that it exists dependently. An object's ultimate truth is that it's empty of independent existence, which, and those two truths are kind of supporting each other, right? Nothing exists independently from its own side, because as you see, everything requires these three types of dependencies: causes and conditions, parts, and the mind that conceives and labels them. A lot of students get confused and they say, if there's no self, what is it that reincarnates? They say, how can Buddhism believe, some people say, well, how can Buddhism believe in reincarnation and they believe in no self? No self does not mean the self completely lacks existence. Saying that something is selfless doesn't mean that something totally lacks existence. If I had no self, or you could say if my body is considered to be selfless, but yet I can do this. The body's here because you can see it. So when we say that this body is selfless, what are we saying? It exists dependently. So it's selfless, meaning it lacks independent inherent existence. It has no independent existence, because how does this body exist? Independence upon causes and conditions. The causes and conditions of this body are originally two parents having sexual union, creating the baby. So there's this body. So causes and conditions. That was the original cause and condition. Actually, on an ongoing basis, the body exists in dependence upon food, in dependence upon the proper climate. If the body was out in negative 60-degree temperatures, it would die. So food, the right climate, water, oxygen. If there was no oxygen in the room, the body would die, right? So it exists in dependence upon causes and conditions, parts, head, eyes, nose, mouth, shoulders, arms, chest, stomach, all the parts of the body. The body exists independent upon the parts, and the mind that conceives and labels it. When the mind sees a certain configuration of phenomena with a head, eyes, nose, mouth, arms, shoulders, torso, legs, feet, hands, fingers, toes, when the mind sees that basis for designation, it labels body on top of it. That's the third type of dependency. So the body does exist. Undeniably, it exists in a conventional way. However, the ultimate truth of the body is that it is empty of inherent existence precisely because it has those three types of dependency. So this is, you have, the two truths. We've covered the two truths, and we've covered emptiness. And you really can't properly learn emptiness until you properly learn the two truths. And you can't really learn the two truths until you properly learn emptiness. You have to learn them together. There's one other quote from Dalai Lama, and I don't have it in front of me, so I might slightly mess it up, but it's from the book Transcendent Wisdom. He says, an object and the idea of that object are not the same thing. However, to the mind, they appear as if they're fused together. So he's saying the object and the idea of the object appear before the mind. And by the way, this is an ignorant mind. The mind of ignorance sees an object and the idea of the object as if they're fused together. So when you see that basis for the designation tree or body, you see that it's not the tree you're looking at. It's the basis for the designation tree. You are putting tree onto that object. You are putting body onto this object. Everything we experience, we're putting something onto it. We're putting a conventional, conceptual label onto that object. So Dalai Lama teaches us that when we see something, when we perceive or conceive something, we experience it, and in our mind we believe that the tree, or that the object we're seeing and the conventional term tree are fused together. That's the problem. That's what we have to untangle in our minds, because that ignorance causes us. By the way, now I'm going to tell you why emptiness matters. I should have started with this. When we see phenomena, by believing that the object and the idea of that object are fused together, we are perpetuating and promoting and basically proliferating an ignorant understanding of how things exist. And since we exist, or since we believe that these things truly exist, independently exist, with their own self-identity independently, we grasp onto them, and we inflate their importance. We grasp onto them. We believe that the consequences of things going the way we want them to go are of dire urgency and dire importance. So this ignorant view that we hold is responsible, it's taught to be responsible for all of samsara. All suffering we've ever known is taught to be a result of our misunderstanding of emptiness. And when students first start studying emptiness, there's this belief, oh, this is too complicated. I can never understand this. But that's the beauty of dependent origination. If you can just understand that tree arises due to the seed, soil, sunlight, moisture, then you've already got the first part of dependent origination understood. And then next, the fact that the tree dependent upon parts, it's actually somewhat simple. You've never seen a tree without, a branch, roots, and leaves. And nobody's ever seen, roots, a trunk, branches, and leaves. Nobody's ever seen a tree separate from those parts. So of course the tree exists in dependence upon the parts. Nobody's ever seen a car without wheels, a windshield, doors, a steering wheel, and seats. You've never seen a car in America and its parts in Europe. Impossible. You haven't seen a tree in Tibet and its parts in India. Impossible. So it's actually, the first two are somewhat simple, right? Things exist in dependence upon causes and conditions. Things exist in dependence upon their parts. These aren't that complicated. And then the fact that things exist in dependence upon the mind that conceives and labels them. This gets a little more subtle, but it's really not that complicated. You see this thing with roots, a trunk, branches, and leaves. That's a basis for designation. You see it, and then you just call it a tree. It's terminology or words or language. And there's awareness too, right? There's awareness seeing that and then labeling it. What's interesting is that tree's existence is occurring here in the mind. That doesn't mean that you can't go out and touch it. You can go touch it. But it exists in dependence upon the mind that labels it using terminology. Now, one thing to mention, the fact that the tree is empty of inherent existence and depends upon the mind that conceives and labels it, that does not mean the mind is physically producing objects. Your mind is not looking and saying skyscraper, and then that doesn't create a building. That's not the meaning here. The meaning is that there is an object there, and we perceive it, and then we mentally impute a word onto it. That's what that means, okay? It doesn't mean that your mind is creating physical objects. That's not really the meaning. That's according to the teachings here. So, okay, I know this was a little bit of a long teaching. I pray that this benefits some of you. And I dedicate this teaching to all sentient beings. May all beings have happiness in its causes. And most importantly, may all beings become Buddhas in one lifetime. May all wars end. May all suffering end. May all all living beings who are hungry have food, have water, and have protection. So I dedicate the merit of this teaching to all sentient beings. And I thank you so much for listening. Take care. Thank you. Bye.